7:14. On the line right now is Professor Allan Saxe, and the professor is with the University of Texas at Arlington, political science professor. Where do the candidates stand on the issues is the topic.
Wait, there are issues in this campaign?
There are. I know you don't realize that. Professor Allan Saxe, good morning. Thanks for coming on.
Who wants to discuss the issues? I want to talk about Lion Ted and Little Marco.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to ask you, we've been kind of going over, before we get to the issues, kind of going over what is happening with the Republican Party and, talk all weekend long about a potential split. George Will coming out and saying that he would vote for a third-party conservative candidate. What does that mean? Let's say all of this happens and there's a split between Trump and the rest of the Republicans. What does that mean when it comes to legislation? What does that and beyond the presidential election? What does it mean passing laws and Supreme Court justices? What does all of this mean?
Everything will change. That's a great question. First of all, Hillary Clinton will likely be elected president. The Republican Party will be splintered for who knows how many more years to come, and who knows what will happen to legislation. The Democrats, if that scenario actually was to happen, I would ask Mr. Will, the Democrats will then likely take over the Senate and make some big gains in the House of Representatives. Legislation will be changed dramatically from what we have at the present time. Everything will be different. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that a man like George Will, who's a very thoughtful conservative, would even believe that backing a third-party conservative party would make any difference. It would make a difference, but not in the conservatives' favor.
Right. It just would split, and it would be an open pathway to the White House for Hillary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And legislation would be stalled for forever. If you want stalled government, that's what you need. The Democrats may, in fact, take over the Congress, but it would be so rancorous, it would be so divisive and polarized that probably anything we've seen in the past would look very mild compared to what might occur.
Yeah, it's almost, could you see a point where there is a split in the Republican Party, and so now we're basically working on a three-party system, which currently the establishment Republicans have really been working and tolerating the Tea Party portion of the party, but now you'd have a split. Could you see a position where maybe the established Republicans kind of align themselves with moderate Democrats? They
could. The Republicans have nobody to blame but themselves. The Republican leadership, Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, in past years, they have nobody to blame but themselves. As a lot of people have said long before I have. The Republicans that are furious at Donald Trump, the Republicans that are furious at the Tea Party ought to look at themselves in the mirror because they have caused it. The way they have dealt with President Obama, the way they've let things slide by, the deals they've made, even on foreign policy, the Iran deal in the U.S. Senate should not have been by an agreement. It should have been by a treaty, but they caved in. The Republican establishment did in the United States Senate. So they have nobody to blame but themselves. So if this is going to occur, and I doubt if we're going to have a conservative third party, it's way too late for that.
Yeah.
You got to get your name on the ballot. You have to fulfill a bunch of legal requirements in every state. It's not going to happen. But again, so the Republican leadership has to understand, George Will included, this is where they are, and to try to make the best of it.
And that would mean rallying behind Donald Trump.
Exactly.
Possibly. It looks like that's going to be the case.
And Donald Trump, I understand, is going to meet with Republican leadership in Congress at some point. And he does have to calm down. There's no question about that. He does, what you do in campaigning, somebody has to tell Mr. Trump, what you do in campaigning is different from what you're going to have to do in governing. And somehow that has to be made very, very clear to him, and he has to understand that. And I think he's a smart man, and I believe he will begin to understand that.
Don't you think he already understands that, though, and is doing what he needs to do to become the front runner and stay the front runner?
I really don't know. That's a great question. I keep thinking about that in my mind. Is this Donald Trump, and is just Donald Trump, and that's the way he's going to be? Or is this a very calculated effort on his part, like he was on a television show, and he understands what he needs to attract the audience? So I hope you're right by the implication of your question, and quite frankly, I'm not sure.
The scary part of this is, though, we were talking last hour, is once you open up that can of worms, once all of a sudden now you've created an atmosphere where protests are now, it's not even a question, will there be a protest? It's expected now.
And it's organized.
And it's organized now.
Extremely well organized. That's right.
So now you have created an atmosphere that is, it's a truck rolling down the hill and the brakes aren't working. I don't know how you put the brakes on.
That's a great point. And I can't imagine that the Republican leadership thought that they could do this forever. The Tea Party's been around for quite some time. Did not the Republican leadership understand that there was a revolt and dissatisfaction within the Republican Party?
Right.
Many of these Tea Party people, according to some statistics, stayed home in the past two presidential elections. They put President Obama into office, essentially, and now they're roaring again. And if a third party starts to try to counteract them, as you mentioned earlier, I think the Republican Party is doomed. The Democrats are sitting off to the side loving this, and Hillary Clinton is perhaps rubbing her hands together. She has a clear shot to the White House under these conditions. If it doesn't happen, there's a good chance Donald Trump could really defeat her. And that's a wild idea, but I think it's a real possibility.
Well, you know what's interesting about Donald Trump is if you're a Democrat, you got to look and say, this is not a traditional, all the rules, you got to throw them out.
That's right.
He could be drawing off a certain portion of the Democratic Party enough to win this thing in November.
We might be saying years from now, like we did with the Reagan Democrats that did the same thing. The Democrats went over and voted for Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
We might be saying years from now, these were Trump Democrats. And that would be a very novel thing that nobody expected.
All right. I know you're out of time. I believe that's the case. Am I correct with that?
I'm good for a minute more, maybe.
Okay. Let me bring in Jack, who wants to make a comment. Jack, you're on with Professor Allan Saxe. Go ahead.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning. What do you have?
Listen, how come Washington, the establishment, instead of getting all in an uproar, why haven't they took a look in the mirror, just what he said, and say, how is it that we failed the American people so bad that they want a talk show host as a president with no political experience at all? They haven't, looked themselves in the mirror. Exactly what he said. Yeah. And here's another thing. What's so hypocritical that Trump had to sign an agreement that he support the Republican nominee. Now that it might be him, they won't support him.
Isn't that the most ironic thing at all?
Great question.
Jack, I'm going to hang up and listen to the answer. Professor, go ahead.
It's a great question. In fact, we ought to ask the Mitch McConnells, the Paul Ryans, the people that lead the Republican Party, and in the Senate, people like Bob Corker, a U.S. Senator. We ought to ask them, you have to do this too. You have to back the nominee. And maybe they will, and I hope they will. It's amazing. And you look at these leaders, and you wonder how in the world some of these people came into office.
Yeah, I know.
But that's for another story. I used to think that if somebody is elected to office, that somehow they know more than we do. They're somehow better than we are. That ain't true.
That is the way we grew up. We grew up thinking that.
That's right, and it ain't true. In fact, it was William Buckley, I think, many years ago, a long time, strong conservative, Yale. And Mr. Buckley said you could go to a phone book and just pick out the top names in the phone book, and you'd probably as good as what you have in Congress.
That is pretty scary. Professor Allan Saxe, love having you on. Thanks so much. Okay.
Thank you, sir. It's always appreciated.
Okay, he's really good. I like him. 7:23. Christine has an